The north-facing wall of the new Aurora Palace Ice Hotel shone like a prism at dawn, its frozen blocks capturing early winter light and chilling it into sheets of turquoise and lavender. Elin Falk, the hotel's principal architect, stood alone in the vast lobby monitoring the invisible hairline changes that came each night as the temperature dipped. To build with ice was to build with something alive. She never forgot that. Yet despite her usual sense of reverence, her mind kept circling back to the incident that had threatened to ruin opening week. 3 nights earlier, the Duchess of Söderholm's heirloom sapphire, an egg-sized jewel called the Polar Tear, had vanished from the vault-like display case erected in the centre of the ballroom. It was not merely a prized stone, it was the centerpiece of the charity gala that lured aristocrats, investors, and thrill-seekers to the edge of Swedish Lapland for the hotel's debut. If the stone were not recovered before the final banquet, invitations would be withdrawn, reputations singed, and Elin's lifelong dream could become a frosted footnote in some scandal anthology. Police had come, questioned everyone, dusted for fingerprints on surfaces that melted at the mere touch of warm breath. They found nothing and departed to interview distant staff in the maintenance tunnels. Hotel management began preparing statements. When they tried to exclude Elin from those meetings, she quietly reminded them the entire structure was her mind poured into frozen water. If a secret lurked within these walls, she might know its language. Now, before the lobby filled with guests sipping cloudberry liqueur, she paced beneath the grand crystal chandelier she had imported from Vienna. Unlike the rest of the decor, ice chairs, ice banisters, even ice chandeliers, this one was blown glass. Thousands of lead crystal droplets formed concentric circles that cascaded downward like upside-down icicles. She had hung it primarily because it echoed every other surface, but subtly resisted them, a glint of permanence among temporary wonders. A tremor of dawn light slipped through the glass roof and exploded through the chandelier. For half a breath, the lobby ceiling rippled with moving constellations. Elin glanced up and froze. Across the vast sweep of the ice floor, specks of rainbow danced in peculiar clusters, staccato patches of colour that flared, ceased, flared again. It looked almost deliberate, like the pulsing of a lighthouse. She recalled her childhood hobby of searching for coded messages in maritime signal lights on a bay far to the south. The memory spilled through her brain in rhythmic dots and dashes. She stepped backward until she stood where the velvet rope had circled the display pedestal, now heartbreakingly empty. From that vantage, the pattern sharpened, a sequence of quick flashes, then longer, then quick again. Morse code. There, refracted by the spinning crystal, was a message someone had hidden in light that would only be visible at the exact angle and hour when the rising sun met the chandelier. Elin snatched her sketchpad from her coat pocket, opened to a blank page, and transcribed. Then the sequence repeated. RINOREWRYREE. Nonsense, she muttered. Perhaps she had misread. She waited for the passage to cycle again, double-checking every pulse with the metronome of her own heartbeat. The letters repeated, stubborn. Rhinora-Ryrie, an anagram? A language she didn't recognize? She scribbled permutations until the lobby doors opened and morning staff entered. She shut the pad before anyone saw. The flicker of code vanished as the sun lifted higher. With casual calm, she greeted employees, but inside her ribs something drummed. Whoever stole the sapphire had left a message in her lobby, inside her chandelier. Why conceal a confession in a code that revealed itself only at dawn? A taunt? Or insurance that some specific observer would find it? She thought of her own habit of dawn inspections. The thief had chosen well. She carried the letters to a quiet corner behind the reception desk and spread them beside a blueprint of the hotel's floor plan. She tried reading the letters backward. Nothing. She eliminated repeated letters, wondered about transliteration, saw nor, we, ire, cry. Then, as she absent-mindedly traced the ballroom outline, the word norrery leapt into her focus. Norrery. That left iwi norrery, that odd mechanical model of the solar system in the rooftop observatory, a lavish toy donated by an astronomy-obsessed benefactor. Arrange the leftover letters as WEI or IWE, we, norrery, we, or we, norrery. Could it refer to something inside the device? Or was it telling her we, in the plural, would find something in the norrery? She could not ignore the hunch. She slipped into her parka and ascended the staircase chiselled from ice blocks tinted midnight blue. On the roof, a geodesic glass dome cocooned the observatory, trapping enough heat to prevent frost from clouding the lenses, yet still cold enough for her breath to smoke. The norrery stood at the centre. Gilded spheres for planets orbited a brass sun. Guests often crowded around it at night as hushed astronomers guided telescopes toward the real celestial bodies overhead. Elin approached the model. She spun the handle. Gears clinked. Nothing seemed amiss. She leaned closer, examining the brass Saturn, the tiny turquoise Neptune. Then a detail stabbed her memory. The real polar tear sapphire had a hue reminiscent of Neptune's seas. She pinched the miniature planet. The sphere unscrewed easily, revealing a hollow interior. Empty. Still, the norrery remained suspect. She lifted her sketchpad and rearranged letters again. WENORRERY. Then the obvious clicked. Norrery, rise, orrery. The leading N might be separate. In orrery, we, or in orrery, I. She reviewed Morse. R, I, N, O, R, E, W, I's, Y, R, E, E. She had separated the code incorrectly. Maybe the spaces were off, punctuation ambiguous. If she regrouped the pulses differently, she might get in orrery, RE. She needed a second set of eyes. She called Anders Lindholm, the hotel's head of security, and asked him to meet privately in the observatory. Anders had a military past and a warm baritone. Minutes later, he clanked up the stairs, perplexed but curious. Elin explained the dawn display, showed him her notes. He whistled. Whoever planned this wasn't improvising. That chandelier rotates 5 degrees per hour on a motor. The thief plotted the sun's trajectory, the spin, the refractive index of lead crystal. They probably tested overnight with a laser. So someone with technical proficiency, Elin said, or someone who hired proficiency. They inspected the norrery together. Anders crouched, tugged at the mechanical base. Panels slid aside, revealing notches where small items could be stashed. Again, nothing. Yet the smell of machine oil seemed fresher than usual. Anders suggested scanning security footage at dawn. Elin followed him to the control suite in the basement, where monitors displayed various camera angles. The feed from 6:17 a.m., precisely when she'd seen the Morse code, showed an empty lobby bathed in pastel dawn. But Anders slowed the playback further. For 2 frames, a faint rim of flare appeared across the camera lens. Flashes she had seen with her eyes, but the footage captured only glare, not the coded pattern. Next, they reviewed footage from the observatory over the past week. Last night, shortly after 1 a.m.,
The feed revealed a silhouette slipping toward the norrery. Temperature sensors and alarms had been disabled. The figure wore a parka with its hood pulled tight, face hidden. They watched the person unscrew Neptune, peer inside, then dip a gloved finger into the gearwork under the platform. The angle prevented a clear view of what was retrieved. Moments later, the figure froze, as though hearing a sound, then hurried away, leaving the observatory door ajar. Curious, Anders murmured. They went there after the jewel was already missing. Maybe they stashed it there earlier, then came to collect, Elin said. But after noticing something had changed, Elin rewound. At 12:58 a.m., another silhouette appeared, this one smaller, posture different. The first visitor had not noticed the second, who darted behind telescope crates. At 1:04, when the first figure left, the second moved to the norrery, seemed to tinker, then departed. Two intruders, one after the other. Anders rubbed his chin. We have rival thieves. Or one thief, one saboteur, Elin suggested. What if the second was planting the Morse code scheme? That chandelier display had to be set up in the lobby, not here. Elin considered. True, but maybe the second person wanted to misdirect, hint at the norrery so we'd think of an astronomical theme. Anders leaned in, pointing at a freeze frame where the second figure reached towards the norrery's base. A silver tool flashed. The resolution blurred, but Elin recognized the silhouette's shape. Lean, slight stoop, left shoulder higher from years of drawing hunched over drafting tables. Her breath collided with her ribs. That's Victor Lutz, she whispered, the hotel's lighting designer, her longtime collaborator. She recalled how he had insisted on calibrating the chandelier motor nightly, claiming micro-vibrations threatened stability. That had given him legitimate reason to be in the lobby at odd hours. Anders frowned. He designed the RGB projections in the ballroom. He's comfortable with optics.
And he had, Elin realized, access to tiny precision tools for shaping fiber cables. Her pulse ticked louder. The idea of Victor being a thief felt absurd. He was devoted to art, allergic to wealth. But devotion to art can become obsession, she reminded herself, and the polar tear had mesmerized many. Elin insisted they speak to Victor before making accusations. Anders agreed, but readied 2 discreet security officers. They found Victor in the backstage of the event hall, adjusting LED strips along a frozen archway. His blonde beard glowed green under test lights. He greeted them with a smile that faltered at the sight of officers. I need to ask about your after-hour maintenance routines, Anders began. Victor's pupils shrank. Maintenance? I fill out logs. Were you in the observatory last night around 1? Elin asked quietly. He hesitated. I went up earlier to realign spotlight housings. The Great Bear constellation projection was drifting. Anders replayed the freeze frame on a tablet. Victor studied the blurry image. Looks like a ghost. Could be anyone. Except the person's right hand wears your distinctive fingerless glove, Elin pointed out. Victor glanced reflexively at his glove-free fingers. He had obviously removed them. Sweat shimmered along his hairline. All right, he said. I was there, but not for what you think. I didn't take the jewel. I was trying to return it. The room hushed. You had it, Anders barked. Victor raised his palms. I found it hidden in the norrery yesterday afternoon while calibrating ceiling projectors. I planned to hand it to Elin this morning discreetly, avoid scandal. But someone arrived before me last night, so I hid until they left. Who was first? Anders demanded. I couldn't see their face. They wore a huge parka. Could be anyone. He looked at Elin, eyes pleading. You know me. I'd never steal for profit. Elin crossed arms. Why not come to me immediately when you found it? Because I suspected someone on staff might be involved. I didn't know whom to trust. He inhaled. But I set up a light trap in the lobby to leave a clue in case something happened to me. I used the chandelier's refraction to encode in orrery. Simple words. If anyone found me unconscious or worse, they'd know where I put the sapphire. But you're not unconscious, Anders said, because I moved the stone after the midnight visit. I feared the thief would search again, so I took it elsewhere. Where? Elin asked. Victor's gaze dropped. Not here. Safer outdoors. Show us, Anders ordered, motioning his officers. Victor sighed, then led them past the rear loading dock onto a snow-covered path towards the art suites, individual structures separate from the main hotel, where sculptors carved thematic rooms. One unused suite, shaped like a spiral seashell, had been sealed for safety. Victor crouched at the entrance, brushed aside fresh snow, and removed a block of frozen slush shaped like a brick. Inside the cavity lay a black velvet pouch. Anders opened it. Blue fire gleamed up at the clouded sky. The polar tear had returned. The officers relaxed, yet Elin wasn't satisfied. If you found the jewel in the norrery, who put it there? She pressed. Who went up before you? Victor shook his head. I saw only a walking parka, broad shoulders. Anders radioed the front desk to lock external doors and gather staff in the conference lounge. While officers conducted systematic searches of rooms for matching parkas, Elin hovered beside Victor in the loading dock's warmth. He spoke quietly. I'm sorry I didn't trust you. When I saw the sapphire in that unimaginative display case, I imagined recontextualizing it with light. I went to the norrery to test how it refracted starbeams, purely for aesthetic curiosity, but I never removed it from the case. Someone else beat me. Elin allowed a strained smile. You and I share the weakness of falling in love with light. She squeezed his arm. Let's hope your light trap helps us the rest of the way. Inside, Anders assembled 80 staff, from chefs to bellhops. The polar tear, now back in its case, resumed its regal twinkle under close guard. Anders announced that the hotel would remain on lockdown until the culprit emerged. He requested any employee with a large grey and black expedition parka to step to one side for routine elimination. 4 people complied: 2 maintenance engineers, a pastry chef, and Sebastian Varga, the financial director who had fought for a cheaper acrylic chandelier instead of the Viennese crystal. Elin noticed Sebastian's shoulders, wide as a timber sled. Anders eyed him too. One engineer's parka bore company logos absent in the video. He was dismissed. The other engineer's stripes did not match. The pastry chef's coat was slim fit. Sebastian's parka matched the frame almost perfectly, except the side pocket where a company logo patch had been ripped out recently, thread ends dangling. Sebastian raised a hand before Anders spoke. I'm no thief, he proclaimed. I was investigating irregularities in operating budgets. I suspected Victor of embezzling funds for luxury glass fixtures, so I surveilled him. Yes, I went up to the observatory. I saw him near the norrery earlier in the day. I later looked for evidence but found nothing. Your security footage will show I left empty-handed. It shows you reaching into the base, Anders countered. Sebastian swallowed but recovered. Touching something isn't stealing. Elin stepped in. What about disabling security sensors? I have clearance codes like any director. Anders produced a thermal imaging still. Sebastian's boots lingered longer by the gear platform than necessary. "What were you retrieving?" he asked. Sebastian's bravado flickered. "Nothing of value." At that instant, a petite housekeeper named Rosa cleared her throat. She hadn't been questioned. Her parka was bright purple. "I saw Mr. Varga leaving the observatory after 1, she volunteered. "He carried a small metal tin. He almost bumped me in the hallway." Sebastian spun toward her. "Lies!" Anders dispatched an officer to search Sebastian's suite. Minutes later, the officer returned with a tin soldering kit. Inside, etched glass shards sporting micro-scratches. Elin recognized them as chips from the chandelier's crystal pendants. Her stomach turned. Sebastian sputtered. "Old samples for structural evaluation." Elin realized removing pendants and reshaping them could alter the chandelier's refractive pathways, the perfect way to embed a Morse display. Whoever designed that code would need to modify pendants themselves. Victor might know optics, but he revered that chandelier. Sebastian, however, had argued for cheaper acrylics. Sabotaging the crystal would vindicate his corner-cutting philosophy. "Why smuggle crystal shards?" Anders asked. Sebastian's shoulders slumped. "Because I shattered a pendant by accident last week and replaced it before anyone noticed. I kept the evidence so you wouldn't trace the cost back to my department." "A convenient story," Anders said. Elin scanned the officers' faces, weighed motives. Victor's dawn trap used the chandelier, yet did not break it. Sebastian broke it and hid shards. Could Sebastian have stolen the jewel too? The timeline, however, showed he touched the norrery after the stone was already missing. Unless he stole it earlier, stashed it, came back to retrieve, and discovered Victor's interference. "Let's compare glove sizes," Elin suggested. The video still of the first intruder revealed oversized gloves with reinforced knuckles. Sebastian's gloves matched. Confronted, Sebastian exhaled. "Fine, I took the sapphire, but only temporarily to cover budget shortfalls. The Duchess is insured. I intended to return it anonymously after moving cash through crypto. But when I went back last night, it was gone. Someone, him, had moved it." Victor's jaw tightened. "I moved it to keep it safe." "Safe? You nearly destroyed us," Sebastian snapped. Anders stepped between them. "Enough. You are under arrest for theft." As officers cuffed Sebastian, Elin experienced a wash of relief laced with melancholy. The hotel she birthed had harbored greed and subterfuge, but also ingenuity and loyalty. That evening, as icicle chandeliers glittered for the final banquet, Elin stood beside Victor at the edge of the lobby. The restored polar tier glowed inside a new enclosure, this one carved from 2 ice plates with fiber optic threads channeling glacial blue light through the gem so that it shimmered like an Arctic dawn. The Duchess inspected it and nodded approval. "Your design is better than mine," Elin whispered to Victor. "We co-authored it," he replied. "You with ice, I with light." They glanced upward. The chandeliers replaced pendants installed that afternoon, cast flawless radiance. No Morse code, just a pure whirl of colours washing across the ceiling. Victor lifted a glass of lingonberry champagne. To frozen water and frozen intentions, Elin touched her glass to his. And to thawed truths. Music swelled, guests danced, and outside the aurora unfurled across the polar sky. Another silent code, ancient and inscrutable, reminding them that human riddles were only temporary scratches upon the grand canvas of light.